In some circles, the sumo deadlift's controversial. In my opinion, it's a great way to build full body strength, either in conjunction with the regular conventional deadlift or as an alternative to the conventional deadlift, especially for somebody who's got some lower back discomfort or pain going on, or maybe some limitations that don't allow them to get down to a regular conventional deadlift. Now, the problem with any deadlift is if you don't set it up right, you're gonna encounter usually the same issues, which is lighten up the lower back and just general discomfort. And in the case of the sumo, it can sometimes turn into a butchered conventional deadlift rather than something that's unique that offers its own advantages. So we want to go over how to set it up properly and some of the common mistakes that I see, but also some of the unique benefits that you get out of the sumo and key considerations that are gonna make it not only comfortable, but effective for you depending on how you like to lift. We're gonna cover where to put your feet and hands with the sumo deadlift, which is some of the areas where people struggle the most. But some key points to setting up this lift, we wanna make sure that we take a stance that is wide outside our hips. We wanna point our toes out, usually about 30 degrees or more. This allows our knees to open up. And we wanna start the bar directly against the shin. I'm going to reach long as I can, creating some tension. And then I'm slowly gonna go down to the bar by opening my knees and getting as close to the bar as possible without having it roll away. And when I can't get down to the bar, I'm gonna allow my hips to slide back. My shoulders or my armpits always start over the bar. I pull my shoulders down away from my ears again, get my eyes looking forward, then I'm gonna push through the floor till I stand up. So here's a quick tip on how to set up both your feet and hands and where they're gonna end up in relation to the bar. So what we wanna do is we wanna center our feet and bring them all the way together on the bar. So for me, middle of the smooth is what I'm looking for. I'm not worrying about how close the bar is. The bar is just a reference point. Then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lift one leg. I'm going to open that knee as far as it will go. And then from there, I'm just gonna set it down wherever that is. I'm gonna look at the bar and where that is in relation to the bar. So for me, it looks like my shin ends up lining up with the first ring on my bar. My bar has 2 rings, yours might not, but roughly figuring that out, I wanna match that on the opposite side. So I'm gonna try to line it up with the ring on the opposite side, and that's where I'm gonna try to aim to have my shin every single time that I set up for the deadlift. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is I wanna make sure that I can be in a position where I can keep a ton of tension through the core and the lats. The thing that many people miss is keeping tension in the lats. So what I'm gonna do to feel what that feels like is, I want you to do this with me. You're gonna stand tall. You're going to reach long from the shoulder as hard as you can. I'm gonna imagine like I'm trying to drive the tips of my fingers through the floor, and I'm gonna turn my palms forward. That's gonna give me a lot of tension along the sides. So basically under the armpit and into the back, those are your lats. So I'm gonna look to keep that tension. I'm gonna look to keep that position. I'm gonna look down at my fingers, and that's roughly where that's gonna land on the bar. So what I do from there is I make sure that when I set myself up, I bring the bar back in, keep it against the shin, and then I reach long finding that tension. I slowly go down to the bar, let my hips slide back when I can't go any further, and then I pull my shoulders down. Do I have enough clearance that my arm doesn't rub too much on my knee or doesn't get in the way of my knee? Then I know I got a good spot. If by chance I took a stance that is too narrow or my knees aren't open enough and it feels like my arms are in front of my legs, then I know that I either need to open my knees or open my stance. You might not have a perfect stance right away, but you should have something close to your ideal from doing that exercise. If it doesn't feel right the first time, I would just run through those steps again, just to make sure that you got all those pieces right, and do them one at a time. So find your foot position, find your hand position, go down to the bar, make sure that the hands or the arms end up slipping well enough inside the thigh. And if that happens, you're in a good spot. Now, let's work on some of the common issues. In some ways, the sumo deadlift is easier than the conventional deadlift because of these two things. And if you do these two things well, you will usually crush the sumo deadlift. If we have our stance right, then if we reach long and reach hard, and we have that hand position, and we do not allow the bar to roll away, then we're gonna have a great lift. And if we keep the knees open and driving outwards on the way down, setting this up, we will have a great lift. So what you're making sure of is, as you go down to the bar, I want you to take a second to the top, make sure the shoulders are driven down as hard as you can, feeling for that tension we just talked about. You're going to open the knees, so a little bend in the knee, and then open the thighs on the way down. And I really want you to take your time sinking into your hips. What you'll notice is that if we have this right and the knees are opening, we have enough angle on the toes, then we're gonna get almost to the bar. If you feel restricted and like the bar is gonna shoot out this way, forward, then you might need to open up your toes a little more, or you might need to take a little bit of a wider stance, or both. So make sure that you find a position that allows you to get 3/4 of the way to the bar without having the bar roll away by opening up the knees. If you can do that, then that last few inches, you can allow yourself to bend over the bar. So my armpit's over the bar, and I'm gonna make sure that bar stays close at all times. I'm gonna reset my shoulder position, and as long as I keep this bar against my shins on the way, I'm keep driving out into the bar, and I keep my shoulders down, I'm usually gonna have an excellent lift. The bar stays close the entire time, and if we do that right and let it pull us down back into position, we will be ready to pull right away into the next lift if you're doing multiple reps. Something that can go wrong with the sumo deadlift as far as feeling it, especially through the lower back, is depending how we finish, that will determine how much we're using our glutes versus our back. So what we want to make sure of is that when we're at the top here and we're reaching long as hard as we can, we are feeling our feet drive down and out, almost as if we can imagine we have a bath mat, a gigantic bath mat, and it's got some wrinkles in it. So what I want to do is I want to smooth out the bath mat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to step on each edge of that bath mat, and I'm going to push, allowing those wrinkles to get spread out of it. And that's the position that I want to make sure that I feel comfortable and stable in. And then from there, I want to make sure that if I want to keep some tension here through the trunk, because oftentimes people will end up finishing with this super puffed up chest and no core tension. My fingers can sink in. So what will happen is that will transfer into the lower back. So what we want to make sure of is if somebody was coming along trying to poke you in the stomach, what would you do? If you couldn't dodge, you would get tight. So we want to make sure that at the top, we've got that long leg pushing out position, and then we're creating some tension. I call this being poke test ready. So I'm poke test ready at the top, and I'm reaching as long as I can, and this is where you start, and this is where you finish. So you want to feel this position every single time that you finish the lift. So as you go down, we open the knees to go down again, we grab the bar, we push to the floor, and then we're always finishing in that poke test ready position. So I want to share with you 3 pro considerations for the deadlift. So once you've mastered the fundamentals of this is where you start thinking about this stuff. So number 1 is going to be the sumo deadlift is very dependent on being patient with the lift. So compared to the conventional deadlift, you can oftentimes pick up weights in really awful positions and still make it a successful deadlift, though you might pay for it later. The sumo deadlift, less so, because it's very unforgiving of letting go the back position, especially in the bottom. So what happens is, if we're rounded out and we're trying to pick up the lift, we have to go almost halfway up the thigh before we can get our hips involved, which makes it an awful feeling lift and really limits how much you can lift in this position. So what we need to make sure of is that when we are sumo deadlifting, that we are taking the time to organize ourselves at the top and feeling good about that before we go anywhere. So that's a lot of why I emphasize throughout this video, making sure that everything happens before you have the bar in hand. Another pro consideration is going to be making sure that we are taking as much of the slack out of the bar as possible to help start the lift. So once we've gotten down to the bottom position for the setup, you've created a ton of tension to get it started. If you think about driving the shin into the bar and then pulling the bar into the shin, then the bar is oftentimes going to feel like it starts to pop off the ground before you've actually initiated the lift. So I'm going to reach long again, grab the bar as tight as I can, drive those shoulders down, and then as I drive my shins into the bar and pull the bar into me, the bar actually hovers off the ground, which you can see. And that initiates the lift and allows for a stronger start position. So that's the only way that you're gonna get the bar to move faster and better from the start. So a note about the grip and what can happen with different types of grips. So for one, the sumo deadlift can sometimes have more friction on the inner thigh when you're going down and pulling any sort of weight. You can adjust your stance a little bit wider to help sort of like give yourself more space for the arm to travel, which creates a little bit less friction. But for some people, depending on your limb lengths, you won't avoid it. So it's just something to be aware of, because sometimes you can get some rubbing, or even in some cases, depending on how extreme, some bruising. And then the other piece of this is that depending on how you like to grip the bar, so I typically recommend for all my clients to either double overhand grip, hook grip, or double overhand with straps. Now, not everybody has that available to them or chooses to. So when you end up with a mixed grip, then what happens is the knuckles on the underhand get pointed into the thigh, and you can end up kind of punching yourself on the one side. And you might instinctually try to dodge that feeling, which will really change the mechanics of the lift. So it's super important to be conscious of that. And honestly, if that's happening to you, I still recommend to go with double overhand grip. But if you choose to, just be conscious that you're not altering the position just to avoid your hand, or you start adjusting the stance to try to find something a little bit more comfortable for you. So just something to look out for. So the key differences between the conventional deadlift and the sumo deadlift is really the strength of emphasis on specific body parts. So what you'll notice with the sumo deadlift is there's way more work going on through the lower body to hold the lift together and to get it moving, and less work up top. So typically it's gonna be a more lower body centered deadlift, whereas the conventional deadlift is more of a mixed bag, that you still need a strong lower body, but it's gonna be a lot of upper back and glutes. Whereas the sumo deadlift is gonna be a lot of hamstrings, glutes, and quads to get it moving. Though you get all of that with either deadlift, it's just gonna be a little less intense or more intense depending on the variation you pick. So that's why they're kind of interchangeable. And if you're missing some involvement of a particular muscle group, you can always fill in the gaps with some accessory work. I appreciate you watching this. I hope you got some value out of it. If you have any questions about the deadlift, or if there's anything in this video that stood out to you, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Now, if you did get some value out of this, please smash the like button. It's really appreciated. And also subscribe, because I'm dropping these every week. Otherwise, stay strong, keep lifting, bring it.